The great chamber of Nexus Prime was silent. 12 species, each one ancient beyond human understanding, sat in their seats and watched the holographic displays floating in the center of the room. The images showed a fleet of warships, thousands of them, moving through the darkness of space like a swarm of hungry predators. Ambassador Trellix of the Vornithy stood before the council. His skin was gray and smooth, and his 4 eyes blinked in different patterns as he spoke. "The Kethari Dominion has chosen its next target," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something heavy in it. "A small world in an unremarkable solar system. The inhabitants call it Earth." A murmur passed through the chamber. Several of the elder species had heard of Earth. It was a young world, inhabited by a young species. Humans, they called themselves. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel within the last 100 years. By galactic standards, they were children taking their first steps. High Chancellor Marak leaned forward in his throne. He was ancient, even by the standards of his long-lived species. His body was thin and bent, but his mind remained sharp. "How long until the Kethari reached this world?" 72 of their hours, Trellix answered. "Perhaps less." Councillor Yivern of the Scilevi rose from her seat. She was tall and elegant, with silver skin that seemed to glow in the chamber's soft light. "We must intervene," she said. "The Kethari will slaughter them. The humans have no chance. And what would you have us do?" asked Councillor Misterin of the Torvaithi. His voice was a deep rumble that seemed to shake the floor. "Start a war with the Dominion? Risk millions of our own lives for a species we have never met? The doctrine of non-intervention exists for a reason," High Chancellor Murrock said. "Pre-ascendant species must find their own path. If we protect every young world from every threat, they will never grow strong enough to protect themselves. They will not grow at all if they are dead," Yivren replied. Marak raised one thin hand, and the chamber fell silent. "We will observe," he said. "Nothing more. The humans must face this trial alone. That is the way it has always been." The vote was unanimous. The council would watch, but they would not help. Trellix returned to his seat and stared at the holographic image of Earth. It was a beautiful world, he thought. Blue and green and white. It seemed unfair that such beauty would soon be turned to ash dot far across the galaxy on that same beautiful world. Lieutenant Commander Katie Morgan sat in the detection center of the United Earth Defense Force. The room was dark, except for the glow of dozens of screens, each one showing different parts of the solar system. Katie was 34 years old, with short brown hair and tired eyes. She had been working for 16 hours straight, but she did not complain. She never complained. The alarm came at 3:47 in the morning, Geneva time. Katie stared at her screen and felt her blood turn cold. The readings were impossible. She checked them again. Then she checked them a third time. "Get me Admiral Torres," she said. Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that. Admiral Ben Torres arrived 20 minutes later. He was a big man with gray hair and a face that had seen too many wars. He looked at the readings and said nothing for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "How many?" "Over 8,000 ships," Katie answered. "The smallest ones are bigger than anything we have. And they're coming fast." Torres closed his eyes. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. Every military leader on Earth had known, deep in their hearts, that this day would come. Humanity was not alone in the universe. They had known this for decades. And they had known that not everything out there was friendly. "Initiate Protocol Omega," Torres said. "Recall every ship, every single one, and get me aligned to the Secretary General." Within hours, the world knew. The news spread across every screen, every phone, every radio. An alien fleet was coming. It would arrive in 3 days. There was no negotiation, no diplomacy, no hope of peace. The Cathari did not negotiate. They conquered or they destroyed. That was all they knew. Katie watched the reactions from her station. She saw the panic in the streets, the crying faces, the desperate prayers. She saw families holding each other, saying goodbye without words. She saw the fear that spread like a disease across every nation. But she also saw something else. In a factory in Ohio, workers abandoned their regular jobs and started building weapons. In a university in California, scientists who had been working on theoretical physics began adapting their research for military use. In a small town in Texas, an old man who had fought in 3 wars put on his uniform one last time and walked to the recruitment center. Across the planet, something was happening. It was quiet at first, barely visible beneath the panic and the grief. But it was there, spreading from person to person like a fire that refused to die. It was determination. Back on Nexus Prime, Ambassador Trellix noticed it too. He adjusted his sensors and studied the human responses more closely. He had expected chaos. He had expected surrender. He had expected the usual reactions of a doomed species facing its end. He had not expected this. Interesting, he murmured to himself. Very interesting. Counselor Yvern approached him. What do you see? They know they cannot win, Trellix said. They understand the mathematics. 8,000 advanced warships against a handful of primitive vessels. The outcome is certain. He paused. And yet they are preparing to fight anyway. Yvern studied the images of Earth. She saw the factories working through the night. She saw the soldiers marching to their posts. She saw the scientists racing against time. Perhaps they are simply too foolish to accept their fate. Perhaps, Trellix agreed. But something in his voice suggested he was not convinced. On Earth, Admiral Torres stood before a room full of military commanders from every nation. The old rivalries and conflicts had been forgotten. There was only one enemy now, and it came from the stars. We have 72 hours, Torres said. Maybe less. I will not lie to you. Our chances are not good. They have more ships, better weapons, and centuries of experience in conquest. He paused and looked at each face in the room. But this is our home. This is the only world we have ever known. And I will be damned if I let anyone take it from us without a fight. The commanders nodded. They understood. They had always understood. The countdown had begun. The Cathari fleet dropped out of hyperspace beyond Mars. 8,000 warships hung in the darkness like a wall of metal and death. At the center of the formation sat the flagship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Conquest. It was 5 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet in half. On the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, Supreme Commander Vexter watched the blue dot in the distance. Earth, his next prize. He had conquered 47 worlds in his long career. Some had surrendered immediately. Others had fought for a few hours before their spirits broke. None had lasted more than a day. Vexter was tall, even for a Cathari. His skin was dark red, and his face was covered in scars from 100 battles. He wore his victories like badges of honor. Soon, he would add another. Send the message, he commanded. The transmission reached Earth within minutes. Vexter's face appeared on every screen on the planet. His voice was cold and hard. People of Earth, I am Supreme Commander Vexter of the Cathari Dominion. You have 6 hours to surrender your world unconditionally. If you comply, some of you will be allowed to live as servants of the Dominion. If you refuse, your planet will be reduced to ash. There will be no negotiation. There will be no mercy. Choose wisely. The message ended. Earth was silent. Admiral Ben Torres sat in the command center in Geneva and stared at the empty screen. Around him, his officers waited for his response. The whole world waited. Torres said nothing. He simply turned back to his tactical displays and continued his work. 6 hours passed. No surrender came. Vexter was not surprised. Many species chose death over submission. It made no difference to him. "Begin the advance," he ordered. "Destroy everything in your path." The Cathari fleet moved forward. Their sensors showed the human defenses clearly. A few dozen warships near Earth, some orbital platforms. Nothing that could stop them. Vexter almost felt disappointed. He had hoped for at least a small challenge. He got his wish. The first explosions came from the asteroid belt. Mining stations that had appeared civilian suddenly revealed hidden weapons. Railguns the size of buildings opened fire, sending metal slugs through the Cathari formation at incredible speeds. Autonomous missiles launched from hidden installations, swarms of them filling the void with fire and destruction. A Cathari cruiser took a direct hit and broke apart. Then another. Then 5 more. Vexter straightened in his command chair. "What is this?" "Unknown weapons, Supreme Commander," his tactical officer reported. "They were hidden. We did not detect them until they fired." Near Phobos, the smaller moon of Mars, Commander Derek Yates led the 7th Attack Wing into battle. He had 42 fighters under his command. They were old, outdated machines compared to Cathari technology. But Derek and his pilots knew how to fly. "All wings follow my lead," Derek said into his communicator. "Draw them toward the moon. Make them chase you." The human fighters dove toward the Cathari formation, firing everything they had. The damage was minimal, but that was not the point. The point was to make the enemy angry, to make them follow, and the Cathari did follow. 200 of their fighters broke formation and chased the humans toward Phobos. They were faster and better armed. They knew they would catch the primitive ships easily. They did not know about the bombs deep inside Phobos, in caverns that had been hollowed out over decades of mining. Demolition charges waited. When the Cathari fighters entered the kill zone, Derek Yates sent the signal. The explosions tore Phobos apart. Rock and metal flew in all directions. 180 Cathari fighters were destroyed in seconds. Derek did not celebrate. 23 of his pilots had died drawing the enemy in. He said a quiet prayer for them and turned his remaining ships toward the next fight. Near Saturn's orbit, a cargo ship called the Bethany Claire drifted among the rings. It had been hauling ore between mining colonies for years. The Cathari sensors marked it as a non-threat and ignored it. That was a mistake. Captain Maria Santos activated the hidden systems aboard her ship. The Bethany Claire was not just a cargo vessel. It carried a prototype weapon that had been developed in secret by Earth's best scientists. A gravity well generator. The device activated, and space itself bent around 2 Cathari cruisers. The ships groaned and twisted as impossible forces crushed them from all sides. Within seconds, they were nothing but compressed metal, smaller than a car. Maria watched the destruction with cold satisfaction. Then she turned her ship toward the next target. On the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, Vexter was no longer bored. His fleet had lost 400 ships in the first hour of fighting. 400 ships against a species that should not have been able to destroy a single one. How is this possible? He demanded. These humans are primitives. They have no advanced technology. His tactical officer studied the data with growing concern. It appears they have been preparing for this, Supreme Commander. For a long time. They hid their weapons. They built their defenses in secret. They knew we were coming. On Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council watched in stunned silence. Ambassador Trellix had stopped blinking. His 4 eyes were fixed on the battle unfolding before him. They knew, he whispered. They always knew. The human destroyer Amarillo was burning. Captain Lisa Gomez had taken 3 direct hits, and her ship was falling apart around her. The engines were dead. Weapons were offline. Half her crew was gone, but she could still fly. Barely. Ahead of her, a Cathari carrier was launching fighters. Each fighter would go on to kill human soldiers, human civilians, human children. Lisa thought about her own children. 2 daughters, ages 7 and 9. They were in a shelter in Colorado, probably scared and confused. She had promised them she would come home. She knew now that she would not keep that promise. "All hands, abandon ship," Lisa ordered. "Everyone to the escape pods, now." Her crew obeyed. They knew what she was planning. Some of them tried to stay, but she ordered them off. This was her choice, her sacrifice. When the ship was empty except for her, Lisa aimed the Amarillo at the Cathari carrier and pushed the engines to full power. The ship screamed in protest, but it moved. The collision was spectacular. The Amarillo hit the carrier at full speed, and both ships exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness of space. Lisa's last transmission reached Earth 2 hours later. Her voice was calm, almost peaceful. "For my kids." Admiral Torres listened to the recording in silence. Then he wiped his eyes and returned to work. There would be time to mourn later. Right now, there was a war to fight. The first wave was over. The Cathari had been bloodied, but they were still coming. Earth had bought itself a few hours. Nothing more, but those hours mattered. Every hour was another chance, another hope, another reason to keep fighting, and humanity was not done fighting yet. The Cathari fleet reached Earth orbit on the 3rd day. Despite their losses, they still numbered over 7,000 ships. Their weapons pointed down at the blue planet below, ready to burn away everything humanity had ever built. Supreme Commander Vexter gave the order to begin orbital bombardment. The first shots fell on Beijing. Beams of energy cut through the atmosphere and struck the city with the force of 1,000 nuclear bombs. Buildings that had stood for centuries turned to dust in seconds. Millions of people died before they even knew what was happening. Then Tokyo, then London, then Moscow. The council watched from Nexus Prime. Several representatives turned away from the screens, unable to bear the sight of such destruction. Councillor Yvonne covered her face with her hands. Even Councillor Masturin, who had argued against intervention, looked disturbed. "This is genocide," Yvonne whispered. "We are watching genocide." High Chancellor Marek said nothing. His ancient eyes remained fixed on the holographic display, watching the blue planet burn. On Earth, Admiral Torres stood in the underground bunker beneath Geneva. The city above him was gone, reduced to rubble by Cathari weapons. But the bunker had survived. And so had he. "All stations report," he commanded. The reports came in. The losses were catastrophic. Hundreds of millions dead. Most of Earth's surface cities destroyed or burning. The human fleet had been reduced to less than 30 operational ships. But there was other news too. News that made Torres smile grimly. Ground-based weapons that had been hidden for decades were activating. Plasma batteries disguised as power plants. Missile silos hidden beneath fake farms. An entire network of defensive systems that humanity had built in secret, waiting for this day. The orbital platform called Vigilance had been officially decommissioned 5 years ago. The public believed it had been destroyed. In truth, it had been moved to a new position and upgraded with the most advanced weapons Earth could produce. Now it activated for the first time. And its weapons tore into the Cathari formation from an unexpected angle. 12 enemy ships fell in the first minute. Vexter stared at his tactical display with growing frustration. Where did that come from? We scanned the area. There was nothing there. They hit it, Supreme Commander, his officer replied. Just like they hit everything else. On the ground, humanity fought back with everything they had. Marine divisions in powered armor launched from hidden bunkers, using small shuttles to reach Cathari ships that ventured too close to the atmosphere. It was suicide. Everyone knew that. But the Marines did not hesitate. Sergeant Chris Dunn was 31 years old. He had joined the military because he wanted to protect people. Now he led a squad of 12 soldiers onto the Cathari cruiser Kethma Prime, cutting through the hull with plasma torches and flooding into the alien corridors. The Cathari were bigger than humans. Stronger, too. Their soldiers stood 7 feet tall and were covered in natural armor. But they had never faced enemies like this before. Enemies who did not fear death. Enemies who kept fighting even when wounded. Enemies who seemed more angry than afraid. Chris and his squad fought their way through the ship, losing soldiers at every turn. By the time they reached the reactor room, only Chris and Private Amy Salazar were still alive. Both of them were wounded. Both of them were tired. Neither of them stopped. They planted the charges on the reactor and ran for the escape pods. The Cathari were close behind, firing their weapons down the narrow corridors. Amy took a hit in the leg but kept moving. Chris half-carried her the last 50 meters. They made it to the escape pod with seconds to spare. The door closed behind them, and Chris hit the launch button just as the charges detonated. The explosion destroyed the Kethma Prime. The blast wave caught 2 nearby cruisers and tore them apart as well. 3 ships for 12 lives. Chris held Amy's hand and watched the destruction through the small window of the pod. "We did it," Amy whispered. "Yeah," Chris replied. "We did." In a secret laboratory deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Nathan Price worked on humanity's last hope. He was 64 years old, with white hair and hands that shook from too much coffee and not enough sleep. He had been working on this project for 20 years. The Prometheus array was a network of satellites hidden among Earth's orbital debris. Together, they could generate an electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to disable all electronics within Earth's orbital sphere. Everything electronic would die. Human technology, Cathari technology, everything. The problem was simple. If they activated the array, humanity would lose their remaining ships, their defense systems, their communications. They would be fighting blind, with nothing but the most primitive weapons. But the Cathari would lose their shields, their targeting systems, their advanced weapons. They would be vulnerable in a way they had never been before. Nathan contacted Admiral Torres and explained the situation. The Admiral listened in silence, then asked a single question. "If we do this, can we win?" Nathan thought carefully before answering. "I don't know, but I know we'll lose if we don't." Torres made his decision. Do it. The Prometheus array activated at 3:17 in the afternoon, Greenwich Mean Time. A wave of invisible energy swept across Earth's orbital sphere. Every electronic system within range died instantly. The lights went out across the planet. Computers stopped working. Communications fell silent. For a long moment, Earth was dark and quiet. But in space, something remarkable happened. The shields around 2,000 Cathari ships flickered and died. Their targeting systems went offline. Their advanced weapons stopped responding to commands. Vexter screamed in fury as the bridge of the Eternal Conquest went dark around him. Emergency lights flickered on, but they were dim and unreliable. What happened? What did they do? No one could answer him. No one understood. And then the humans attacked. They came with weapons that did not need electronics. Ballistic missiles launched from submarines. Chemical rockets fired from mobile platforms. Kinetic impactors, simple metal rods accelerated to incredible speeds. Slammed into Cathari ships with devastating force. Ground troops with rifles and grenades boarded disabled vessels, fighting hand-to-hand against the giant Cathari soldiers. They died by the thousands, but they kept coming. Always more. Always fighting. Ambassador Trellix watched the battle unfold with something close to disbelief. They destroyed their own technology, he said. They blinded themselves just to blind their enemy. Madness, Counselor Mr. muttered. Complete madness. No, Trellix replied. Desperation. And something else. Something I do not have a word for in my language. On Earth, the fighting continued through the night. In the darkness, with nothing but fire and moonlight to see by, humanity refused to surrender. They fought with everything they had left, and slowly, impossibly, they began to win. 3 days into the siege, Supreme Commander Vexter stood on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. His fleet had lost more than half its ships. 4,000 vessels destroyed by a species that should have fallen in hours. His warriors, the finest soldiers in the Dominion, were dying by the thousands against enemies armed with primitive weapons and unbreakable will. He had conquered 47 worlds. He had never lost a single campaign. And now these humans, these impossible, infuriating humans, were bleeding him dry. Supreme Commander, his tactical officer said, our ammunition reserves are at 40%. Fuel is running low. At this rate, we will be unable to maintain combat operations within 72 hours. Vexter slammed his fist against the arm of his command chair. The metal bent under the impact. Then we end this now. Full assault. Every ship. Burn that planet to nothing. The order went out, and the Cathari fleet began its final push toward Earth. On the surface, Colonel Maggie Pierce gathered her volunteers in a ruined church outside what had been Chicago. She was 43 years old, with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that had seen too much death in the past 3 days. Around her stood 200 soldiers, the best that remained. They were all that was left of the 101st Airborne Division. You all know why we're here, Maggie said. Her voice was calm and steady. The Eternal Conquest is their command ship. Kill it, and we kill their leadership. The whole fleet falls apart. A young corporal raised his hand. Colonel, how do we get there? We don't have any ships left that can make the flight. Maggie smiled grimly. Actually, we do. The Cathari have been landing troops using dropships. We captured 3 of them intact. Our engineers have spent the last 12 hours figuring out how to fly them. The soldiers exchanged looks. Flying enemy ships into the heart of the enemy fleet. It was insane. It was suicide. No one objected. We launch in 1 hour, Maggie said. Get your gear ready. Write your letters. Make your peace. She paused and looked at each face in the room. I won't lie to you. Most of us won't be coming back. But if we succeed, we save our world. That's worth dying for. The soldiers nodded. They understood. They had always understood. Meanwhile, Captain Jake Harmon sat in the command chair of the frigate San Antonio, one of only 17 human vessels still capable of flight. His ship was damaged and running low on everything, but it could still fight. That was all that mattered. Jake was studying the enemy formation when he noticed something strange. The Cathari supply ships were clustered near Saturn's rings, protected by only a small defensive force. Most of the enemy fleet had moved toward Earth, leaving their supplies vulnerable. He contacted the other captains on a secure channel. I have a plan, he said. It's risky, and it will probably get us all killed. But if it works, we cut off their supplies. They'll have to retreat or starve. Captain Rosa Martinez of the destroyer Santa Fe was the first to respond. What do you need? Everything you've got. We burn through our remaining fuel, make a high-speed run to Saturn, and hit them before they know we're coming. That's a one-way trip, said Captain David Chun of the cruiser Houston. We won't have enough fuel to get back. I know, Jake replied. I'm not planning to come back. But if we take out those supply ships, Earth might survive long enough to win this war." There was a long silence on the channel. Then, one by one, the other captains agreed. 17 ships, crewed by men and women who knew they would never see home again, turned away from Earth and began the long burn towards Saturn, back near Earth. The 3 captured dropships rose from the surface, carrying Colonel Pierce and her 200 volunteers. They flew dark, with no signals, no identification, hoping to blend in with the chaos of the battle. It almost worked. They were halfway to the Eternal Conquest when a Cathari patrol spotted them. Energy beams cut through space, and one of the dropships exploded. 60 soldiers died in an instant. Evasive action. Maggie shouted, "Get us to that ship." The remaining 2 dropships dove and weaved through the enemy fire. Another hit took out their engines, but momentum carried them forward. They slammed into the hull of the Eternal Conquest and cut their way inside. Maggie hit the deck running, her rifle already firing. The corridors of the flagship were vast, built for beings much larger than humans. The lighting was red and harsh. The air smelled of metal and something bitter, like burnt copper. Cathari soldiers met them at every turn. The fighting was brutal and close. Humans died by the dozens, but they kept pushing forward. Room by room, corridor by corridor, closer and closer to the command deck. A Cathari warrior grabbed Private Tommy Lou and lifted him off the ground. Tommy pulled the pins on every grenade on his belt and smiled. The explosion killed him and the warrior and 3 more Cathari behind them. By the time they reached the command deck, only 11 of the 200 volunteers were still standing. Maggie was bleeding from wounds in her shoulder and leg. Her rifle was empty, so she drew her pistol and kicked down the door. Vexter turned to face her. He was even larger in person, towering over her like a god of war. His eyes were filled with fury and something else, something that might have been disbelief. "You," he said, "you are nothing. Your species is nothing. How dare you challenge the Dominion?" Maggie raised her pistol. "We are humanity. We dare everything." She fired 3 rounds into his chest. The first 2 hit his armor and bounced away. The third found a gap and punched through. Vexter staggered, looked down at the wound, and then looked back at her with something like confusion. "Impossible," he whispered. Maggie fired again. This time, she aimed for his head. Supreme Commander Vexter, conqueror of 47 worlds, fell dead on the deck of his own flagship. Maggie activated the ship's communication system and broadcast to both fleets. "People of Earth," she said, "the enemy commander is dead. Keep fighting. Never surrender." Then the Cathari guards broke through the door, and Maggie turned to face them with an empty pistol and a smile on her face. Far away, near Saturn's rings, Captain Harmon and his 17 ships tore through the Cathari supply depot. They destroyed fuel tankers and ammunition stores. They set fire to everything they could reach. The Cathari defenders fought back, but it was too late. By the time the human ships were destroyed, the damage was done. The Cathari fleet suddenly faced a critical problem. They had enough supplies for perhaps 2 more days of fighting. After that, they would be stranded in hostile space, unable to fight or flee. On Nexus Prime, the Council watched in stunned silence. Ambassador Trellix turned to High Chancellor Murrock with a question in his eyes. "How?" Trellix asked. "How is this possible? They are outgunned, outmatched. They should have lost days ago." Marek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "Because they do not know they are supposed to lose. They do not accept it. And so they keep fighting, long past the point where any reasonable species would have surrendered." "That is not logical," Councillor Misterin said. "No," Marek agreed. "It is not. And perhaps that is why it is working. On Earth, the news of Vexter's death spread like wildfire, In the ruins of cities, in the shelters and bunkers and hidden camps, people heard the message and felt something stir in their hearts. Hope that the enemy was still out there. The fleet was still massive. The war was not over. But for the first time since the invasion began, humanity believed they might actually win. And that belief was more dangerous than any weapon. The Cathari fleet was dying. Without Supreme Commander Vexter, the chain of command had broken. Sub-commanders fought among themselves for control. Some wanted to continue the assault. Others wanted to retreat. None of them could agree on anything, and the humans kept attacking. From the ruins of Geneva, Commander Katie Morgan coordinated the final defense. She had been a lieutenant commander when the war began. Now, 3 days later, she was the highest-ranking officer still alive. Admiral Torres had died in the second day's fighting, along with most of the senior staff. The responsibility had fallen to her. She had perhaps 40 operational ships left. 40 against 3,000. The numbers were impossible, but impossible had stopped meaning anything to humanity. All ships, this is Commander Morgan, she broadcast. The enemy is wounded. Their leader is dead. Their supplies are gone. They came here expecting easy prey. They found us instead. She paused, feeling the weight of every word. This is our home. Our only home. Let's show them what that means. The response came from across the solar system. Ships that should have been dead limped back into the fight. Civilian vessels, armed with mining lasers and improvised weapons, joined the line. From the outer colonies, reinforcements finally arrived. Ships that had been days away when the invasion began, crewed by miners and settlers who had turned their cargo haulers into warships. It was not enough. It could never be enough. But it was everything humanity had left, and they threw it all into the battle. The Carrier Horizon was the largest ship humanity had ever built. It was also one of the most damaged, with half its hull breached and most of its weapons offline. Captain Steve Bradley knew his ship could not survive much longer. But behind the horizon, the colony ship Providence was making its escape. 50,000 civilians, mostly children and their families, were aboard. They had been evacuating toward deep space since the first day of the war. If they could reach the outer solar system, they might survive even if Earth fell. A Cathari battlecruiser moved to intercept. Its weapons powered up, ready to destroy the helpless colony ship. Steve made his choice without hesitation. All hands, abandon ship. Everyone to the escape pods, now. His crew obeyed, but many of them understood what he was doing and refused to leave. In the end, 37 officers stayed aboard with him. 37 people who chose to die so that 50,000 could live. The Horizon accelerated toward the battlecruiser, putting itself directly in the line of fire. The Cathari weapons struck the carrier again and again, tearing it apart piece by piece. But the ship kept coming, kept blocking the path to Providence. Steve Bradley died with his hand on the helm, guiding his ship into the enemy vessel. The collision destroyed both ships. The explosion was so bright it could be seen from Earth. Behind them, Providence escaped into the darkness of deep space. 50,000 lives saved by 30-8 in the skies above what had been New York. Fighter pilot Danny Ruiz was out of ammunition. His plane was damaged, leaking fuel, barely able to fly. He should have returned to base. He should have landed and waited for repairs. But below him, a Cathari bomber was approaching a refugee convoy. Thousands of civilians were in those vehicles, trying to reach the safety of the underground shelters. If the bomber reached them, they would all die. Danny thought about his mother in Miami. He hoped she had made it to safety. He hoped she would understand. He pushed his throttle forward and aimed, his plane at the bomber. The collision was small compared to the battles happening in orbit. Just 2 aircraft, 1 alien and 1 human, destroying each other in a ball of fire. But it saved 3,000 lives. Danny's last words were a prayer. Not for himself, but for his family. For his world. For everyone who would live because he had died. The battle raged for 18 hours. Ships fell on both sides. The darkness of space was filled with explosions and debris. Humanity was losing ships faster than they could afford. But the Cathari were losing something more important. They were losing their will to fight for the first time in their history. The Cathari faced an enemy they could not break. Every time they destroyed a human ship, 2 more appeared. Every time they killed a human soldier, 10 more took their place. The humans did not surrender. They did not flee. They did not beg for mercy. They just kept fighting on as the sun began to rise over a scarred and burning earth. Something extraordinary happened. The Cathari fleet, what remained of it, began to withdraw. It started slowly. A few ships turning away from the battle. Then more. Then hundreds. Within an hour, the entire fleet was in retreat, limping toward the edge of the solar system with barely enough fuel to reach friendly space dock commander. Katie Morgan watched them go from her station in Geneva. She had not slept in 4 days. Her eyes were red, her hands were shaking, and she felt more tired than she had ever felt in her life. But she was alive. And so was Earth. All stations, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hold your fire. Let them go. Her officers stared at her in surprise. Some of them wanted to pursue, to destroy every last enemy ship. But Katie shook her head. We've won, she said. That's enough. Let them tell the galaxy what happened here. Let them tell everyone what humans are capable of. On Nexus Prime, the council chamber had never been so quiet. The 12 elder species sat in stunned silence, watching the Cathari fleet retreat from a world they should have conquered in hours. Ambassador Trellix was the first to speak. I have witnessed many things in my long life. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have seen species achieve greatness and others fade into extinction. But I have never seen anything like this. They should have lost, Councillor Mistern said. His voice was hollow with disbelief. By every measure, every calculation, they should have lost. High Chancellor Murrock stood from his throne, something he rarely did. His ancient eyes were fixed on the image of Earth, battered and burned, but still defiant. Transmit to all member worlds, he said. The human species is to be granted immediate provisional membership in the Galactic Council. He paused, a strange expression on his weathered face. And send a diplomatic envoy to Earth. I believe we need to have a conversation. The message reached Earth 2 hours later. Katie was sitting in the rubble of what had been her childhood home when the transmission came through. She read it twice, unable to believe what she was seeing. Then she laughed. It was a strange sound, somewhere between exhaustion and joy. Provisional membership in the Galactic Council, recognition, alliance, everything humanity had dreamed of achieving. Through decades of exploration and diplomacy, won instead through blood and fire and sacrifice. Around her, the survivors of humanity began the long work of rebuilding. The cities were gone, but new ones would rise. Billions had died, but billions more had survived. The scars would take generations to heal, but they would heal above them. The stars looked different now. For all of human history, those distant lights had seemed cold and indifferent. Now they seemed almost welcoming. Humanity had earned its place among them. Councillor Yurine visited Earth 3 months later. She walked through the ruins of Geneva with Commander Morgan as her guide. The silver-skinned alien looked at the devastation with something like sadness. Your people paid a terrible price, Yurine said. Katie nodded. We did, but we're still here. May I ask you something? Something I have wondered since the battle ended. Of course. Yurine stopped and turned to face her. You knew you could not win. Your own calculations showed it was impossible. Yet you fought anyway. Why? Katie was silent for a long moment. She thought about Admiral Torres, who had died leading a counterattack. She thought about Captain Lisa Gomez and her final message. She thought about Colonel Maggie Pierce and her 200 volunteers. She thought about Danny Ruiz and his prayer. "Because this is our home," she finally said. "The only home we have ever known. And some things are worth fighting for, even if you might lose. Especially if you might lose." She smiled, and for a moment, she looked almost peaceful. "We couldn't accept a universe without Earth in it. So we fought until the universe agreed with us." Yvonne considered this answer for a long time. "I think," she said slowly, "that the galaxy has much to learn from humanity." Katie looked up at the sky, where new satellites were already being launched to replace the ones that had been destroyed. Somewhere out there, the Kethari were licking their wounds and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. Somewhere else, other species were hearing the story of Earth and reconsidering what they thought they knew about the universe. "Maybe," Katie said. "But we have a lot to learn, too. That's what makes it interesting." Above them, the sun continued to rise. A new day was beginning. A new era was beginning. And humanity, battered but unbroken, walked forward to meet it. The war was over. The future was just beginning.